Next, from Springfield, we go one-on-one with Bob Flider, the former state representative who is now the newly appointed director of the Department of Agriculture. He talks about the state's financial crisis on the Department of Agriculture's manpower and how the Quinn administration plans to work with agricultural producers to help double the state's exports. This runs about 35 minutes.
Director of Agriculture Bob Flider, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Good to be here, Terry.
You know, the last time we spoke, which may have been 6 months or so ago, you were in a different position. You were working with the Partnership for Connected Illinois. Prior to that, you had worked as a state representative for many years, representing the Decatur area. You are, to my recollection, one of the few, maybe the only director of the Department of Agriculture that hadn't been a farmer previous to becoming director. Mm-hmm. Let's start with how is it that you were selected, and what do you think, what your background brings to the job?
Right. Well, thank you for that question, Terry, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and talk about agriculture. And I think the short and long answer is that while I had not been a farmer, I've been around agriculture and around many of the activities associated with agriculture for quite some time. And I think that probably being involved with rural development through the Partnership for Connected Illinois, working on broadband deployment in rural areas, probably helps somewhat in that I had a very close working relationship with the folks at Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, people I had worked with in the legislature and in the governor's office, and I think they saw, you know, perhaps somebody who might be able to hit the ground running in an agency that they believed could make a difference for Illinois. So I've represented some area and rich farmland in Macon, Moultrie, and Shelby counties, and of course that's also home to many of the a couple of the main agribusiness companies in Illinois, Tate & Lyle and ADM. And so I think the governor perhaps thought that it might be able to help in my capacity with my knowledge of government and the fact that we had a close working relationship, I think didn't help or didn't hurt in the past. I think he knew me, and we had we had a lot of projects we worked on in the past, and I think he said, hey, I think, you know, maybe Flider can help. So he had his staff reach out to me and asked if I'd be interested in the position. I said immediately I would love to have an opportunity to work with you and your administration. That was actually last fall, and then time went on, and received another call from Chief of Staff Jack Lavin, and we had a conversation, and we talked a little bit about the things that were important to Illinois, not only the importance of agriculture, but also the importance of leveraging what's happening in agriculture to help Illinois work its way out of the economic recession that we'd seen and that had made our finances here in the state much more challenging and difficult. But in terms of agriculture and the opportunities it presented, what a great foundation to rebuild our economy. And in addition to that, knowing that the governor had established a goal of doubling exports by the year 2014, I thought that I could certainly work with them to try and do what we could to work within the livestock industry and the grain industry and the food processing industry to increase our exports and bring some of that foreign money back in Illinois, which surely is going to be beneficial to the economy here.
You know, you opened up a number of areas that I wanted to get into. But before I do, I would say, you know, I'm a city kid. At least I grew up in St. Louis, and so I'm probably representative of a lot of people. The population primarily is urban in the state by the nature, just by the nature of the way things are. But there's some interesting statistics looking at the Department of Agriculture's website that I found is something. There are 76,000 farms, according to your website, in Illinois, covering more than 28 million acres, or 80% of the state's landmass. The other thing is that I think people who often are in the cities fail to recognize that agriculture is the state's #1 industry, and how many different places or jobs are produced and tied directly or indirectly with the enterprise of agriculture. In fact, again, going back to your website, it's Illinois is first in the nation in processed food sales, and that's where I was going to go. And you mentioned ADM, Tate and Lyle in Decatur, where you had been the state representative. I did not know that food processing is the #1 manufacturing activity in the state of Illinois. So it's not just about, obviously, farmers out in the field planting corn and soybeans, although that certainly is a lot of it.
Right. Well, you know, and when you think about food processing, you're talking about taking grain, corn, soybeans, for example, and transforming that into ethanol, of course, is in addition to food products, livestock products, but also, you know, you have companies that manufacture food, and that's all considered part of the food and agriculture industry. It really is huge, and then on top of that, you know, you think about the new byproducts that you know, come out of this, and so, you know, one of the main activities of the Department of Agriculture is that we have a marketing program where we try and match buyers and sellers. And we actually matched 7,100 buyers and sellers last year, and that has resulted in some significant revenues for the state of Illinois. In fact, for every dollar that we spent, we've received a return of $46 in terms of increased revenue for the state by putting the buyers and sellers together. And those are all agriculture, food related. So a big part of what we do is promote Illinois food and Illinois products. But, you know, one of the things I just, speaking with you here today, yesterday, coming off, I think one of the highlights of my career in public service was participating in a meeting yesterday established by the governor, the Illinois Export Advisory Council. And you know, this was a meeting that, you know, traditionally when you think about business activity in the state of Illinois, you think Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, but Governor Quinn is looking at not only DCEO, but also Department of Agriculture. So I was invited to that meeting, and we strategized with some of the major corporations in the state of Illinois in terms of how can we work together to increase the state's exports. What can the state of Illinois do to help businesses sell their products overseas? And so when you think about trying to leverage all of our strengths into a statewide strategy, you know, and having agriculture at that table, it's really, really significant. And so it's an exciting place right now for agriculture to be. So, you know, we think about the value-added food products, the processing that takes place, the corn syrup that is comes from our local corn and is sold to other companies. So
I was going to say, you know, we see the corn in the field. One of the things, corn syrup, and so things like probably the sodas that we drink are different places. You know, again, that you don't realize maybe that you're digesting some of the product of corn from Illinois.
Right.
I think we're second in the nation after Iowa in corn production.
We are. We're usually first or second in the nation, and you know, interestingly, about 40% of our corn and soybean is exported overseas, the raw grains. So
I'm sorry, how much?
About 40%. So it's really significant. And so not only do we export the raw product, but we also, through the food companies and other processors, export the value-added products, and that's really the thing that creates a lot of jobs in Illinois. I
wanted to touch, you know, a lot of people are focusing on China in different realms. The company that runs Kentucky Fried Chicken actually has many more restaurants, as an example, now in China than they do in the United States. So when you say 40% of our exports are going overseas, we have these markets that are opening that heretofore hadn't been digesting, taking in the products. China, India, other developing nations. When you met in Chicago yesterday and you talked to these corporations, was that one of the lines that people are looking to explore? And what did you hear from the corporate partners as far as what they would like to see from the state to help them expand exports?
Much of it wasn't directly agricultural related, but it was focused, for example, on what about Africa? What can we do to, you know, pave the way to sell more products in Africa. Or there was a resolution or an issue in Congress right now where we have an export bank that helps leverage certain kinds of financing for companies in Illinois that are trying to sell overseas and helps them with their financing. Well, there's a certain amount that Congress needs to approve in order for this financing mechanism to continue to be available for corporations in the United States. And other countries are helping finance some of these activities for their companies that are exporting to the countries we like to export to. So one of the things was talking about was how can we work in Washington as a state to get the nation to support our efforts so we could sell more overseas. So it was a lot of it was big picture, but a lot of it was, how can we as a state work in Washington to open up, create opportunities to help Illinois companies market their products overseas. One of the things that relates to agriculture that came up at that meeting specifically had to do with transportation and the Mississippi River, for example, the depth of the Mississippi River and the dredging of it. And this is something that I've heard as a theme that had come up earlier, a couple of weeks ago when I was talking with some of the folks from the Farm Bureau here in Illinois. What can we do to open up the navigable rivers, make sure that they're available so we can take our products, get our products, and move them to the ports, say in Louisiana, to where they can be shipped to the world.
Yeah, people, I think, again, sometimes if they drive over the Mississippi, they'll see some barges, but they don't realize the extent to which our products are going out to the world markets down the Mississippi. It's still that waterway, it's a highway of commerce that maybe people don't appreciate.
It is, and without that, those navigable waters, without that transportation or infrastructure, how are you going to get your products out? And it was something that the Illinois coal industry talked about, the Farm Bureau and the agriculture industry needs desperately.
Are they saying that there's a problem with that it needs to be dredged more, that the Mississippi's too shallow? Or?
Yeah, it needs to be modernized and dredged more so that we could get our larger vessels through there, if you will. But apparently silt builds up, and so between dredging and some of the locks
and dams,
right, that need to be updated. But those are ways that, again, Illinois can go to Washington and go to our federal officials and say, here's how you can help Illinois. Here's how you can help put some resources into an area that could help us export more dollars and bring more money into the United States.
Of course, the lock and dams over in Alton, for those to be updated, would not help merely Illinois, but every other state that's sending product down the line. So I would think there'd be a lot of support in Congress for that.
Well, you would think, and interestingly, we talked regionally, said, we are talking about primarily Illinois, we're interested in Illinois, but we have to think regionally as well, because we have to work with the other states. Governor Quinn talked about this as well, that it's important that we think regionally. It's important that we find ways to work with our the governors and the governments of our surrounding states cooperatively, rather than in some kind of a way that competing against each other politically. Let's find a way to work together economically.
When we talk about agriculture, and the irony, I think, in one hand is, I remember back in the mid-'80s, and you have Willie Nelson with Farm Aid, and the farmers were losing their farms. More recently, this has been boon times for the farmers. The price of corn has risen quite high, I believe soybeans as well. But ironically, it comes at a time then when the state is having severe financial problems. How has the state fiscal problems affected the Department of Agriculture in terms of the money that you have to do to perform the duties that you're assigned?
Well, the reality is that the budget is affected, the fiscal challenges of Illinois has affected the budgets of every state agency, and agriculture is no exception. We talked about exports, we talk about the positives that agriculture means to our economy, but there's also the responsibilities that we have for regulatory aspects, making sure our food is safe, making sure that the eggs you buy are the quality that that they're marked, that the meat that you buy, that the animals are free of disease, and that they're inspected. That when You go to the gas station, we make sure it's our job to monitor the weights and measures, make sure that you get a gallon of gas. And all those things, you know, are the top priority as we present our budget to the General Assembly. But the reality is that, you know, we've been asked to cut back this year, and there's additional pressures that we'll have to face. And so the most important thing we have to do is make sure that we are fulfilling our statutory obligations. And that has been a challenge. And during this past budget year, we've actually seen our budget, general revenue fund, decline. Well, actually, since '08, we've seen it go from $49 million in general revenue fund dollars that come into our agency to $29 million this year. And we've had a corresponding reduction in jobs as well. So I think the thing I'd want to point out there, though, is that the department has a number of holes and gaps in its organization chart just because the dollars haven't been there to fill those jobs. But it speaks to the dedication and the commitment of the employees here. You know, every day I come through the door to come to work here, and there's somebody who says I've been here for 20 years or 25 years or 18 years, and I've loved working here, and I wouldn't want to work anywhere else. And I think it speaks a lot to the employees of the agency who have had to do the job with declining dollars.
Bob, in preparing for this, I asked some people working in the agricultural area. One of them said, and kind of a follow-up to you were saying the responsibilities were, I said, you know, what is it that the Department of Agriculture does? And they said, you know, primarily it's a regulatory agency, as you alluded to. And I didn't know until that they mentioned the weights and measurements that all of us in the cities and all, when we buy gas, you make sure that we're getting a gallon of gas for the money we spend. But there was some concern about, are you going to have the manpower? Since if they want to bring some new product to market, maybe it's new fertilizer or whatever it may be, and it's going to be regulated by your department, are you going to have the manpower to perform those duties in a timely fashion? They obviously don't want to bring, again, if it's fertilizer, just as we hit planting season here, they don't want to get approval for a new fertilizer that takes September before it's approved. Where do you stand as far as being able to perform these duties? And I know you're new to the post, but do you have a sense for where you stand relative to the manpower needs vis-a-vis the regulations and responsibilities your department has? Yeah,
and there's a couple of approaches that we're taking as a department, that the department has taken and will continue to take. But I think the most important thing, first and foremost, is that we here at the Department of Agriculture, as well as I think the administration, are very hopeful that the legislature will be able to resolve the pension issue, pass some kind of pension reforms that'll help stabilize the costs of the pension systems for the state, and in addition, do the same with the Medicaid system. If the legislature can take some action to stabilize the Medicare costs, or excuse me, Medicaid costs and the pension costs for the state of Illinois, then that lake or that amount of money that's available to all state agencies will stabilize, but it just keeps going down every year. So first and foremost, what we're trying to do is just get folks to understand here that when the soil and water conservation folks come in and say, we sure hope you don't cut our budget, we say, look, we don't want to cut your budget. We support your programs. We think they're important. We believe in sustainability. We believe in making sure our resources, our natural resources, are sound, and just as God created them, we want to make sure that they're available for future generations. The U of I extension folks who have an appropriation, the wine growers who, we helped get them off the ground, and we market them on one hand, but we help support them on another hand. These are all groups that are affected by our budget, and we want to be able to fund their programs. We want.
Do you think you have them? I mean, have you? Well, and again, I know you're at this point in time. We're talking. You're acting director. You've been nominated. You're in the position, but you still have to be confirmed by Senate. I mean, you're that new, and we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. So, understandably, you may not have been able to digest all that you are still. It's probably like, as they say, drinking from a fire hose,
a little bit.
As far as all the information coming in. But obviously that would be a concern,
Yeah.
just to make sure that some of these things
Yeah.
can be done in a timely fashion.
Yeah, so one of the things that it hasn't been so popular in the Centralia area in Clinton County is we're consolidating our animal testing lab there with one in Galesburg. And our staff looked at the dollars available and they said, okay, what can we do? The feeling is that we can still continue to provide the testing necessary for the livestock in Galesburg. Now, if you don't live in the Centralia or Galesburg area, you know, and you're asking for the Department of Agriculture to do some testing for your animals and so on, then oftentimes those samples are put in an envelope and they're mailed to one of the labs, or maybe even a lab at the U of I or another state, for example. So we're not really the only lab, but we do feel like we can have continue to provide the service necessary, but at a more cost-effective means. And admittedly, it would affect the jobs in Centralia area, and that is a concern. But it also would save $1 million in taxpayer money. I would hasten to add.
Really, that's
yeah.
I mean, when we were talking on a percentage basis,
yeah.
when you were talking about your budget, that's a sizable savings.
Yeah, and we used to get $1 million from the USDA for some of that testing. Well, because of the testing, because of the advances in research, actually some of those tests are not necessary. So as a result, the USDA is now funding us only to the tune of about $88,000 for some of that test. So
$88,000 when you used to get $1 million?
We used to get $1 million, right. So those are some real pressures from the federal government as well. So it just sort of requires us to, and again, we have a great staff here, but they've stepped up to the challenges. The health and safety of the public is first and foremost here. That's not something that any of us want to sacrifice, nor will we sacrifice. But we admittedly have to do more with technology and find ways to be more cost effective, and that's going to be a challenge until some of these major fiscal issues for the state are resolved.
And I mean, everyone wants government to be more lean and mean, but at the same time, if it gets to the point where all of a sudden you're waiting for months for something to be done, there's a cost to that as well, obviously, especially when we're looking at industry and when we talk about it being the largest industry in the state. I wanted to go back as far as exports. I meant to ask, are you looking, or have you and the governor talked about maybe either trade missions or opening up new trade offices overseas? I had a fellow mention to me that when Governor Ryan went down to Cuba during his term, that Illinois had started doing something in the area, if I recall the numbers right, like 80 or $100 million of trade with Cuba. Governor Blagojevich took the money out for that trade office in Chicago, and now Illinois is down to about 40 million. So sometimes we have these cuts in government that is a little bit like shooting yourself in the foot when it's costing you sales. What if any, plans have been made for the expansion of trade offices in other nations?
Well, we actually have a representative in Hong Kong and one in Mexico. And these are representatives who work to try and find new markets, new opportunities for us to market our products. But I also think that this exercise that we're going through with the council, where they're going to provide some guidance, where we're going to learn more about some of the markets that are out there, will help us utilize our resources in places where we might not have been able to. The governor's going to Brazil, for example. And Brazil is apparently a strong exporter, always looking for markets. So that's really where our competition lies, is with other countries like Brazil. So, that's exactly what we're trying to do with the council. But, last year, for example, the department's marketing efforts resulted in $59 million in actual sales for Illinois businesses and agribusinesses. And so that's resulted in quite a return for the state of Illinois. And that's been recognized and certainly perceived as an opportunity. So I would say Governor Quinn has definitely recognized and understood the importance of the investment in activities that will bring a return to the people of the state of Illinois. And so, for example, we'll continue to work with DCEO and others in state government, try and leverage our abilities to work with them to market our livestock overseas, and quite frankly, production here is key as well. The ability for livestock producers to produce their products so they can sell it, and we'll work with Illinois companies to just find markets wherever we can. The governor basically says, "Where do you want me? Where do you want me to go? Where can I open up the markets? Who do you want me to meet with?" And he's there, and he's just saying, "Just tell me where to go." And I think that's really significant.
In fact, I think he was just recently over in Brussels, was he not?
Brussels.
And actually didn't get much coverage while he was over there.
Yeah,
but
he was in Canada recently.
You know, another fascinating thing, you've touched on it a little bit here in our conversation, there's what I call the changing face of agriculture that crosses over where I think it touches people who otherwise think of themselves as wholly removed from the agriculture community. A lot of us city folk, we drive on the highways and see the corn and soybeans, and that's the only association we have. But we have in Illinois an explosion in the number of wineries, which fall under the Department of Ag, I guess, and kind of a tourism as well. There's something up to 80, somewhere between 80 and 100 wineries, I think, now in the state, where maybe a decade ago it was in the neighborhood of 12. And then the other interesting trend, I think, is this whole farmers market and buying produce locally. I think that is in, I don't know the number if you know, but what I've heard somewhere north of maybe 800 or more farmers markets now being held on a regular basis around the state. What's your take on these trends? And I don't know if you've had a time to think of them, but they're probably a minor part of the Department of Agriculture's picture, but maybe a high profile as far as I say, we city folk participating with them.
Well, I think we actually do have, in our marketing department, we have some interaction with there's a local food farms and jobs council that is actually working on trying to create new markets for Illinois products, Illinois farm and food products. And, you know, interestingly, what we're seeing is that I think people like the idea of knowing where their food comes from. They like the idea. I mean, think about it. You go to the farmer's market and, you know, you can go over there, you can buy some tomatoes, some cucumbers, squash, and walk away and feel pretty good about it. You know, you kind of know, you know these people, you know where it came from, and that's a burgeoning industry. But I think even more so, as markets evolve and change, approximately of the $48 billion that Illinoisans spend on food in their budget every year, about 10% they buy in state. Well, if we could expand that by just 10%, we could have a $20 billion economic impact on
you say 20 billion?
$20 billion impact on the state of Illinois, if you think about that. And so as these demands increase, when I say demands, you know, as you know, families like the idea of buying their food locally. We know of some entrepreneurs who are on our 35-member task force who are working to create new markets in schools and institutions for these products. If it takes off, it's an economic boom for the state of Illinois. So yeah, again, you know, if we could increase that market just 10%, it's $20 billion economic impact on the state of Illinois.
You know, it's fascinating because some of these stories I've covered over the years, and when I was doing local news in Central Illinois, I covered down in the Sullivan area a fellow who is a farmer, had about 400 acres of corn, but he was on 121, which is a good traveled thoroughfare down there, and he had about a 3-acre vegetable garden with a stand where you could pull over, as you see, and you buy vegetables. And he said to me, I make more money off those 3 acres than I do off the 400 acres.
Yeah.
And I've had other people on covering this issue periodically say, you know, they have people who they train to be farmers, and because they're selling through the farmers markets, they can make $15,000 to $20,000 an acre off their vegetable because they're not selling it to a middleman. They sell it right to the end person. So these dollars that we as consumers spend, as you say, can have a very significant, I was shocked by these numbers.
Yeah.
You know, you go out and you spend $10 on vegetables, you don't realize that's staying in your local economy and it's not going off to, you know, buy something from California.
Right. And I know the gentleman you're referring to there on 121, and I represented that area in the legislature, and I oftentimes on my way through I'd pull in and pick up some peaches or pick up some pumpkin, you know, around Halloween, and it was the kind of, you know, it was the kind of place where on Sunday they'd be closed, but they'd say, okay, you know, just leave your money, just throw it in the door here, you know, take some pride. And it was sort of on the trust basis. I mean, it just made you feel good about it. But I think even more so, let's just say that you have a producer who's got a product producing tomatoes, for example. So how can he produce enough, and how can we find a processor that can take that product and put it in a form that maybe could be sold in our schools we know that some of the school buyers are beginning to, you know, hear from the parents that we like the idea, you know, rather than the distributor coming off and dropping off a big old can of beans and, you know, dropping them into hot water and serving them on my kid's plate. You know, what about some of these local foods? What about these fresh foods that are out there? And you mentioned, you know, the urban areas, and there's an urban high school, the Chicago Agriculture High School, 111th Street in Chicago, part of the Chicago public school system. And they're an agriculture high school, and so the kids there they're growing vegetables and they're eating them, and they're, you know, eating them in the cafeteria. But so agriculture's not just about, you know, the farm fields in central and southern Illinois. It's also about, you know, so many of the other activities that take place.
Obviously, you have a lot on your plate, and we wish you well, and congratulations again on your appointment.
Thank you, Terry. It's great to be here, and I thank you for coming out to the Department of Agriculture. It's you know, just a wonderful place to be for me personally, and I certainly want to do what we can to, you know, make sure that the food supplies are safe. We support agriculture, but every bit as importantly, make sure that our economy is benefiting from the activities in agriculture in Illinois.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.